Hello and welcome back to True Summer Knits. My name is Maddie and you are watching True Summer Knits. Today we are back. It's been a while since I posted, took a break for a little bit, but today I'm going to be talking all about my favorite patterns released in the month of October 2024. I have less patterns than I usually do, but the ones I have I really like and I'm really excited to share them with you. So we're just going to go ahead and get started and talk about the first pattern. The first pattern I have for you guys today is the Teresia sweater by Gregoria Fibers. If you're in the knitting community, you know Gregoria Fibers. She's a great designer. Not everything is something I might necessarily wear, but everything she designs is something I admire, if that makes sense. Like, she just has a style. Like, she knows exactly what her style is, she knows exactly how to execute it, and it's really admirable how she knows what she likes, she knows what she wants to make, and she always does it every single time, even when she's coming out with like a pattern a month or whatever. So this one is relatively simple of a pattern. She says it's polo inspired, but it's just kind of like a basic, more fitted crew neck sweater with a little keyhole neckline, and if you look really close, around the keyhole, you've got these little cables that kind of go around and like frame the keyhole, and then at the top, she has this little pearl button that holds the two tips of the keyhole together, and it is so beautiful. It's really vintage, reminds me of like kind of sweaters you'd see in like the late 40s and 50s, so I'm in love with it. She knit hers in Cardiff Cashmere Classic, which is obviously an expensive yarn. The gauge is more of like a sport weight, or I guess a heavier sport weight. She labels it as DK, but I definitely would use a lighter DK for something like this. You want something like thinner, drapier, you know? So her gauge is 25 stitches by 38 rows just in stockinette. So yeah, that's like a sport weight-ish kind of gauge. She's got a good size range for this. She's got 8 sizes, and those sizes are meant to fit a range of bust measurements from 31.5 inches to 55 inches. So good size range. So this is worked top down. Since it's fitted, it looks like she is using a like satin sleeve method, which means, you know, the top of the sleeve has like a bell curve, and there's lots of shaping to make the arms fit really well, because it has that more fitted classic fit. So you're working the back yoke and you're shaping it with increases, and then it just says the fronts are worked separately, so I'm not sure if you cast them on by themselves or if you're picking up to shape the fronts, or if you're just increasing on either side and leaving some stitches on hold as you work one side of the front and then moving to the other side of the front. I'm not 100% sure, because obviously you have to do a lot of shaping to create the crew neck and then create the keyhole before anything can be joined in the round, and you're having to do all the shaping for the armholes. But then once you get all that done, then you're finally just knitting stockinette in the round for the rest of the body, and then you're picking up and knitting the sleeves. And since the sleeves are contiguous, I'm guessing once you pick up for the sleeves, you're probably doing some kind of short rows or something to create that bell shape and keep it fitted at the shoulder. But I'm not 100% sure. That's just my guess based on how these kind of satin sleeves are usually done. So it's definitely a more complex construction, but overall a very simple design. Like, you're doing a lot of stuff up here, stuff you might not be used to if you're just usually knitting drop shoulders or raglans, but once you get past that, it's just plain stockinette all the way down. So it's good if you want to learn more about this construction or experience a new construction, but you don't want to worry about having too many complicated details at the same time, you know what I mean? And something like this, if you really are wanting to like splurge for Cardiff Cashmere, which obviously very expensive and it requires a good amount of yarn for this pattern, but if you're wanting to do something with that, I feel like this would be a really good pattern because the construction, you know, it keeps you interested up top, but it's simple and it's got some nicer details, but mostly it can just show off the pretty yarn, you know? Which I feel like that's kind of what you want to do when you're knitting with super nice, expensive yarn like cashmere. And this pattern is knit on 3.5 millimeter needles for the body, 2.5 millimeter needles for the ribbing, I'm guessing. And this pattern costs €7.12. The next pattern is by another designer that is another designer that really knows her style and really has interesting classic pieces that are also somewhat kind of vintage inspired or really elegant, modern, classy, that kind of thing. And this is the Manon jacket by Marika Knits, who I talk about her all the time. I love her work. I've knitted one of her sweaters. I want to knit more. I just really love her work. So this one is really interesting. She has the Manon cardigan, which is pretty similar, but that one is designed to be short-sleeved. I'm not sure if the gauge is the same or if it's different, but this one is longer-sleeved. It's meant to have like a more tweedy type of fabric. They're both done in the same stitch, the moss stitch, but this one is clearly meant to mimic like the Chanel boucle jackets. If you've seen those, you know they're very recognizable. They're really beautiful. They really just seem like high-end and classy. And this is the only pattern I've ever seen to kind of mimic that Chanel jacket look, which makes me want to knit one. But I would have to really think carefully about my yarn choice, because the Chanel jackets, they're done in boucle fabric, and they kind of interwoven with sort of different color yarns and threads, and sometimes they have like a little bit of sparkle to them. So I'd have to think carefully about like my yarn choice and how best to recreate that. But she's done pretty good with her tweed yarns that she chose for her oranger sample. And her other sample is, I believe, a sport weight and a mohair held together, which still creates an interesting texture, but it feels a little bit further away from the Chanel jacket look, if you know what I mean. But it's still beautiful. And I love the little metallic buttons that she chooses. And it's got little pocket flaps, which are on those kind of Chanel jackets, although these are fake pockets. I checked, they're just little flaps with buttons. There is no pocket functionality in this pattern. So if that bothers you, just keep that in mind if you're planning on knitting this or you're interested in knitting this pattern. So the tweed yarn that she uses is Woolfolk Flet, which is a DK weight merino, and this one is kind of like a boucle. Like, they describe it as a textured wool, and if you look up close, it's kind of got the curly little fibers like you are used to in a boucle. So that would work. It'd be interesting for something like this to hold like a boucle yarn and then also hold maybe a lace weight. It wouldn't even have to be a mohair, just maybe like a lace weight silk or something in a slightly different color to add that kind of mixture of color and texture that the Chanel jackets have. I feel like that'd be maybe a good way to recreate the Chanel jacket look, like a pink and a white or a black and a white. That might be a good way to add that visual interest that the Chanel jackets really have, that is really nice and popular and I really like. Her other yarn choices, which are again the sport weight wool and the lace weight mohair, are the Onling number 10 and the 16. The number 10 is their silk mohair, which they have in a lot of colors, and the Onling number 16 is actually, that's the tweed one. So I misspoke before, the other one's a boucle yarn, and this one is a tweed, mohair, and wool mixture, and they describe it as kind of like a more rustic, tweedy yarn. They're all very slightly heathered. I think a lot of the tweediness comes from the mohair mixed with the wool, and it's really nice yarn. So I'd really like to try Onling yarns at some point in the future. I've seen some that I really like. I know they've got like an Angora merino blend that I'd really like to try, but I just have not bought from them because it's a new company, and I'd have to really decide what project I'd want to knit with their yarn. But this might be a good one to consider, although I do really like the look of her boucle sample, so I don't know. It's something I have to think about. The weight for this pattern is a worsted weight pattern. I'm guessing just based on the gauge, because the boucle yarn is listed as a DK weight, but the gauge for this is 20 stitches and 30 rows in stockinette. Or, I'm sorry, the gauge is 20 stitches and 30 rows in moss stitch, which I've never done moss stitch, but I know it's just some kind of combination of knit and purls, so it wouldn't be very difficult. That also means it's not so much of a hardship to be knitting flat, because if you're knitting moss stitch in the round, you're still knitting and purling pretty much just as equally as if you were doing moss stitch knitted flat, you know what I mean? So there are worse things to be knitted flat than this, if you don't like purling so much. Or I guess a better way to put that was, if you don't like purling, it's not going to make a difference whether you knit a moss stitch sweater or a cardigan, you know what I mean? So the way this sweater is constructed, it's top down. You begin with the back neck and shoulders. You're shaping the shoulders with German short rows, and then you're picking up stitches at either shoulder to start working the fronts. So I think you're working the fronts, you're shaping, doing some shaping for the neckline, doing some shaping for the armholes, and then once you meet at the armholes, everything is knitted flat for the entire body, and then you can pick up stitches later for the sleeves. The neckline is worked in 1x1 rib. You are working a double knit button band for all the jacket edges, and then there's 1x1 rib at the bottom of the body and the sleeves. And then when you're done with all that, then you're knitting the 2 little faux pockets and sewing them onto the body, and then you're sewing on all your buttons. So yeah, this is a really beautiful piece. This is something I feel like if I saw this in real life, I would never think it was hand knitted. Like, it looks like a store-bought, like, expensive piece. So I really wanted to share that one. That came out this month. I'm obsessed with it. This comes in sizes extra small to 3XL. It is designed to fit your natural bust measurement of 31.5 inches to 51 inches. So a little less size inclusive, but I wouldn't say necessarily it's not size inclusive. And a majority of this project is knit on 4.5 millimeter needles, but you need basically everything from 4.5 to 2.5 for the different parts that make up the sweater, like the double knitting, the ribbing, the pockets. So make sure you look at all those needle sizes before you start this if you don't have like a complete interchangeable set or something. The next top is one that I love so much. I have already cast on. I'll talk about that more in my podcast episode next week, but I have basically almost finished this. I knit it in a week and a half, which is insane, and it is super beautiful. It's unlike any other pattern I've seen. This is the Kirby top by Blue Squirrel Yoom Knits. She's a Korean designer, which I've never seen any of her other work before, but I really love this one. It's a dolman sleeve top, so I don't see dolman sleeve very often. It's basically like a bat wing type construction. The sleeve and the shoulders are all one piece, essentially. You are working the yoke kind of like a raglan, but instead of having 4 raglan spots where you're increasing on either side of the central stitch for like the sleeve openings, you're only doing increases on either side of the central stitch right on the shoulder line, so it kind of looks like a seam, and you're working all the increases for the yoke like that for a long time, basically until you get to the bottom of the sleeve, and it's the underarms all draping underneath like this, and that's the entire yoke. But you do all the increases to get to the bottom of the sleeve, and then you're separating for the back and the front to knit in the flat for a little while so that you can add shaping to the underarm. You do that for the front and the back, and then you're joining everything in the round, knitting the body in the round, and you're finishing with 1x1 rib. And then to do the finishing, the sleeves are finished with just a double knit edge to keep them flat. And the way she has it in the pattern, you begin by the neckline by doing 2 or 4 rows of double knitting. But for me, I could not get it over my head when I did it like that, so I ended up having to do like 3 rows of 1x1 rib. And I think what I'm going to do is fold over those 3 rows of 1x1 rib, pick up all the stitches around it, and do the surprisingly stretchy bind off to create a more robust edge. I don't know for sure if that'll work, but you can tune into my podcast episode next week to see how it worked out, because I'm not sure yet. But I'm going to figure out something, because I could not get the slip stitch double knitting to fit over my head when I tried doing it like that. So I'm probably doing something wrong, but I'm not sure what I am doing wrong. She says she knit this in a fingering weight yarn. The gauge is 21 stitches by 32 rows, which you could use like a sport weight and knit it at a looser gauge, or you could find a drapey DK weight yarn. I was using Cardiff Cashmere for that because that was my anniversary present, so I just thought that would be perfect for this project, and it is. I'm knitting mine on 4.5 millimeter needles, but it's designed to be knit on 4 millimeter needles, and then you need 3 millimeter needles for the ribbing. The yarn she uses, she does not list a brand, but it must be some kind of Korean yarn because it's really interesting. It's 35% raccoon, 30% wool, and the rest is polyamide. I have never even heard of raccoon yarn. I don't even know where you would get that. I tried Googling it and I couldn't find any sources where you could buy it. So if anyone's used raccoon yarn, please comment and let me know your experience. I'm very curious about that. Never would have thought raccoon yarn would be a thing. I mean, I know possum yarn is a thing now, but I also don't know that that's something I can get here in America. I wonder if they're similar. I don't know. This one is less size inclusive, but it does have a few sizes. It goes from extra small to 2XL, and I'll put on the screen in inches what the actual bust measurements are, but it goes from 80 centimeters to 105 centimeters. And I was knitting the size small. The next pattern I have is a kind of riff on one of this designer's most popular designs, and just one of the most popular designs in the knitting community as a whole. This is the Porcelain Damasque sweater, or is it damasque? I'm not sure, by Lane Homosansa, or Lynette. You know her for her porcelain sweater, I'm sure, and some of her other popular designs. This is, like I said, kind of a version of the porcelain sweater, but it's not color work. It's all done in just these knits and purl textures. And when she knits it in this light blue, it kind of creates like this embossed sort of look, like a textured vase almost. I thought it was color work at first. I thought she was doing the body in like a light blue and all the pearl textures in like a white, which I thought was really cool because it really did make it look like a piece of art, like a sculpture. But from what I can tell, she's using all one color, and she's using mohair and a DK weight yarn held together. So she's using Santa's Garn Tin Silk Mohair and Santa's Garn Sunday held together. The gauge for this pattern is 21 stitches by 28 rows in stockinette, and most of the body is knit on 4mm needles, and then she also has 3mm needles for the ribbing, I'm guessing. She only has 6 sizes for this pattern, and the way she labels them is kind of weird. I've never knit one of her patterns, so I don't know if she labels her other patterns this way. She has the sizes in like these groups. So size 1 is extra extra small / extra small. Size 2 is extra small / small. I don't really understand why she's labeling it like that. And then she's got like medium, large, and then she's got extra large and 2XL grouped together, and then she's got a 3XL. I don't know why she does it like that. I don't know if it's just sounds bad, but I don't know if that's just to make it look more size inclusive than it is. I don't know, but that's how she does it. And the finished bust circumference goes from 35.75 inches to 58.75 inches. It doesn't give too many details on the construction. It's top down, it's a drop shoulder, so you're starting with the back, you're doing presumably short rows for the shoulders, picking up for the fronts, doing your neck shaping, and then everything is pretty much just knitted in like a square until you reach the underarms. Then you're knitting everything in the round, picking up stitches for the sleeves, and knitting the sleeves. She says the texture is charted, and she's got certain borders, that's what she called it, borders of stitches on the front, and then some on the sleeves. And she kind of has a design like the porcelain sweater, where the pattern on the sleeve is kind of meant to blend into the same pattern on the body, which I always like. This one is a lot subtler than the porcelain sweater, and I do really like it. I think it's one of those that kind of looks better from far away. When you get up close, I feel like it kind of breaks the illusion, unlike the porcelain sweater. But it is definitely an interesting version of the porcelain sweater. For the next pattern, I'm going to start with one pattern by this designer, and then I've got another pattern by this designer. She released 2 this month that I really like. And the designer is Woolbird Knits. The first one we're going to talk about is the Gemma cardigan, which is a pretty simple cardigan. It's done in this all-over slip stitch pattern, which gives it this super interesting texture, gives it a lot of like depth within the texture. And then you look close and you see it's all just knit stitches, just slipped to create this little weave of stitches. It's really cool. I love slip stitch patterns. I think it's like very subtle, but very beautiful. It's like a more interesting stockinette almost, you know? Because sometimes I don't always like the look of purl stitches. So I really like slip stitch textures because they create textures and you don't have to use a purl stitch. Construction-wise, it's very simple. It's a raglan cardigan. It's got a V-neck, or like a very subtle V-neck. So the neck is more open, and then you've got the slip stitch pattern all over. You've got your raglan increases. Everything's knitted flat except for the sleeves. Those are knitting around. And then around all the edges for the button band, it's double knitted. And then there's ribbing at the bottom. Very simple. It's not so oversized as some other cardigans. It's not super fitted, but kind of looks like it's meant to fit you, if that makes sense. She uses realllyyy woolly, which is 100% wool yarn, and it's a worsted weight yarn. So the gauge for this pattern is 22 stitches by 32 rows in the slip stitch pattern, which I don't know exactly what that is. Normally I would try to give you reference for what the yarn's gauge is, like just in Stockinette, but it doesn't have it on their Reveille page for some reason, so I'm not sure. But I'm guessing you could use just any kind of heavy DK weight yarn or like a light worsted yarn to make this pattern. The body is knit on 4.5mm needles, and then you also need 4mm needles and 3.5mm needles for finishing work and ribbing. She has a really good size range for this pattern. She's got 10 sizes ranging from extra small to 5XL, and that gives you a finished bust measurement of 34.25 inch to 66.25 inch. So really good range there. She always has really good ranges for her patterns. I really do like this designer. Never knit anything by her yet, but I like a lot of her designs, and I'm going to at some point. And this is meant to have a positive ease of 4 inches. So again, not oversized really, just more like a fitted cardigan. You can still, it's got some room so you can still wear stuff underneath it, but it's not oversized. So the next pattern by Woolbird Knits is the Ivy pullover, which is a sweater, a lace sweater. It's all over lace, and it's got this lace pattern that literally just looks like little ivies. It's like a little circle with eyelets, and then there's a little stem going through it, I guess is the best way to explain it. And it's really beautiful. She's got 2 samples that she knit, and I do like the one that's just in wool, but the one that I like the most is the one with mohair. I feel like all those eyelets and textured with a little bit of fluff on top of it really gives like an interesting look. I don't always like mohair with textured knits, but for this one, I think it looks way better with the mohair, not gonna lie. I don't know if she has like a partnership with realllyyy, because she also uses that same yarn for this one, realllyyy woolly. So I don't know if that was released like in conjunction with them, but it's another worsted weight pattern. The gauge is 19 stitches and 24 rows in that Ivy lace pattern. Again, she's got 10 sizes. And this one has a finished bust measurement ranging from 37 inches to 70.75 inches. So another, again, big size range. This is definitely a positive ease sweater. It's meant to be more oversized. She recommends having 10 inches of positive ease, which is a very good amount. So keep that in mind. I'm sure if you wanted to size down or up even more, you definitely could. But this is another raglan pattern, and since it's a sweater, everything is knit in the round except for the neck shaping. You work that flat for just a little bit, and then you join in the round, and you keep doing your raglan increases with all the textured lace. It looks like it's a 2-stitch raglan, and then you join in the round, you separate for your body and sleeves, knit the body, go back and knit your sleeves, and you are done. So construction-wise, it's very simple. Raglan's one of the most simplest to do, so this would be good if you want to. If you've been knitting a lot of sweaters, you've knit raglans before, but you want to try out a long-term lace project, this would be a good one. Because just looking at the lace, I can tell it's pretty simple. It looks really nice, but it definitely is not simple. The repeat's probably pretty quick, so it wouldn't be too much to remember, I wouldn't think. So this would be a good pattern for your first time lace work, if that's what you are wanting to have as a lace garment. And this one is knitted on 4.5mm needles with 3.5mm needles for the ribbing. The next pattern is a really cool pattern. It's this chunky looking twin cable pattern, although it's not actually that chunky of a knit, just the cables are so large and like plump that it makes it look like a really chunky knit. This pattern is just called Harper. It's by Andrea Bronice. This is a DK weight knit, and again, it's in like this all over twin cable pattern. The gauge is 34 stitches and 35 rows in the cable pattern, but the gauge for the yarn that she suggests is 21 stitches. She recommends using Laying Yarns Venus, which is a 50% superwash merino, 50% cotton yarn blend. So That'd be nice for if it doesn't get too cold where you live. It'd be a little bit more breathable with the cotton. I feel like I need to try out some yarn like that for some of my sweaters, considering it's still 80 degrees outside. We're about to get another hurricane. I don't see the weather cooling down until like maybe next month sometime, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. This is definitely a less size inclusive pattern, but it's one I really like that came out this month, so I'm still gonna show it to you. It's got 4 sizes, and it's an oversized fit, so there is some level of flexibility there with the sizes. Again, I'll put the numbers in inches on the screen, but the finished bust measurements go from 100 centimeters to 174 centimeters. So I'm sure you could play around with the fit there if your size is not exactly what's listed in the pattern. So this is a saddle shoulder construction, so it's knitted top down. You knit the collar in the round, and then I think you separate to knit flat, because it looks like you knit the collar in the round, and then once you get here, it looks like you're knitting flat for the saddle shoulders themselves, I believe, and then you're increasing at the back of the shoulders to shape those shoulders while you're working the saddle shoulder. She doesn't go into too much detail on the construction, so I'm kind of guessing here, but based on pictures and what she has described, this is how I think it's constructed. And then you're doing shaping for the armholes, and once you're done with all that, you're joining in the round, and the rest is just knitted in the round. I don't even think it has ribbing. I think it's all just the twin cable all the way down. Even on the neck, it's just the cable. So yeah, it's literally just that cable pattern the entire sweater. There's no ribbing at all. It looks like there might be a couple rows at the bottom where you finish it, but other than that, no ribbing. And she recommends a positive ease of 20 centimeters, which should be 8 inches, I think. I'm working on my centimeter conversion. I'm working on them. And this pattern costs €6.50. Tell me if I'm saying that right. I'm not used to the euros, but yes, you get it. The next pattern is an interesting design. This is one that looks better from far away, but that's just because me personally, I don't love the look of purl stitches, and a lot of this is made up of these stripes of purl stitches, but I do think it still gives like an interesting texture. I like the descending cables up top. This is the Cable Rain sweater, which is a very fitting name considering, again, it has like these descending cables across the front of it, which is cool. This is by Una Kim on Ravelry. It's a worsted weight pattern, or like a heavy DK, I guess. She uses Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino, popular yarn, and the gauge is 18 stitches by 27 rows. I'm guessing just in stockinette. She doesn't say, but this pattern I feel like would be easy just to measure your gauge in stockinette, because there is a lot of it. You just have a few cables up here, and then those stripes of pearls, but they don't go all the way across. They're like little 1.5-inch segments kind of broken up across the sweater. This is knit in 4.5mm needles and 4mm needles, and this one has 5 sizes. Finished measurements go from 96 centimeters to 121.5 centimeters. I'll put that on the screen. And she says all the cables are charted, but everything below the armholes where you're knitting the round, that's not charted, it's just written, which is just some purl stitches, so I'm sure that is fine. This is another raglan, so you're knitting top down. It's not 100% sure if there's any knitting flat up here. It's possible you're just knitting in the round for the neckline. It does say there are short rows, which I'm guessing are at the back neck, so I think it's all knitted in the round, and then you're just doing short rows for the back neck to make it a little higher than the front. The cables look pretty basic, so it's not like super complex cables. There's only a few of them. The chart seems like it's probably very basic, and then once you're down under the underarms, you're not looking at a chart anymore. So it's an interesting looking pattern, but that's not complex to make at all. This designer has a lot of interesting patterns with interesting textures that are like not very common, so I would check out her other designs. But I also really like the 2x2 rib at the bottom. I feel like it blends in a lot more with the texture, because 2x2 rib stands out a little less than 1x1 rib, I feel like. Like, it makes a statement, but it doesn't look so different from what's going on with the rest of the sweater, if that makes sense. But it does look like the collar is still 1x1 ribbing, but everything at the bottom of the sleeves and the body, that is 2x2 rib. And this pattern costs $8 US. I just double checked, and that is all the patterns I have for today. As all my videos like this, the Ravelry bundle for this will be linked in my description. If you like this video, please subscribe or comment and let me know what you thought. Let me know what other patterns might have come out this month that I didn't talk about. And I will see you guys next week with another podcast episode. Thanks for waiting with me while I had this little break, and thanks for coming back and watching. I'll see you guys next week. Bye!